Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Bonsai Boy, but my friends call me Bon, and today I'd like to talk about what is now both one of my new favorite games and an unprecedented revolution in tactics-based gameplay. I'm talking of course about none other than the excellent new title from Vanillaware, Unicorn Overlord. Before we get started, I'd like to give a light spoiler warning for the game. While I won't be diving too deeply into the story, I will be discussing the basic premise and highlighting some of my favorite moments. However, with that said, I will be doing my best to avoid any major spoilers and will be limiting footage of cutscenes to those found within my first 10 hours of this over 30-hour game. And last but not least, let's go over the game's performance as it's rather straightforward. I played Unicorn Overlord on a PS5 and found that it ran great throughout my time with it. It maintained what I felt to be a solid 60 FPS and in my experience was incredibly stable as I faced no major bugs or performance issues. Like I said, straightforward. Now without further ado, let's get on with the video. While this video is meant to be more than a review as I have some very specific elements I want to discuss, I think it's worth giving an overview and mini review of the game up front on account of its rather unique title and the tendency for games from this studio to fly under the radar, so to speak. So, having said that, I'm sure many of you are wondering just what this game is. After all, Unicorn Overlord is an incredibly vague name, and yet a perfect fit for it once you get to grips with the plot. I'll get to that later, but first, let's go over what kind of game we're talking about. Unicorn Overlord is at its core a strategy and/or tactics RPG that can be most easily compared to something like Fire Emblem. Now, much like in Fire Emblem, the gist is this. You play as the commander of an ever-expanding roster of medieval fantasy-themed troops, which you control on the field of battle in a series of strategic skirmishes throughout the game. When two opposing units meet on the field of battle, they clash and the fight plays out based on various predetermined factors. Said units are made up of a wide cast of characters with different personalities and backstories that you recruit as you play through the story. They each have different strengths and weaknesses depending on their class, equipment, and stats, and as you play through the game they will level up, develop new skills for use in and out of battle, as well as build relationships with each other. Now, before the die-hard Fire Emblem fans get worked up, I'll say that there are some major differences. I just think that their similarities help paint a clearer picture of what one can expect from this game. Having said that, I'd now like to highlight some of the things that make the game unique or different from the Fire Emblem series, which are as follows. First, we have its inspired take on combat that blends both the real-time pause system of old computer RPGs with modern real-time strategy mechanics. This is in direct contrast to the turn-based system of Fire Emblem. Second, we have the unique semi-open overworld that serves as both an explorable backdrop and setting as well as the open field of battle across which the game's stages are set. This is likewise different to Fire Emblem's grid-based maps, which you enter as individually crafted instances with no connection to the overworld. And finally, we have its in-depth but approachable unit system that is built around having a squad made up of multiple characters. While you can pair up 2 character units in Fire Emblem, this squad-based system in Unicorn Overlord takes it quite a bit further. Now as for the story, I found the plot and characters to be really well written overall. While the plot isn't particularly original on the face of it, a young prince is forced from hiding and fights to reclaim his birthright a decade after his mother's kingdom and the rest of the continent was seized by an evil tyrant, there's actually some real interesting twists and turns once things get going that I won't spoil. Short aside, but the reason the game is called Unicorn Overlord is because our protagonist, Prince Elaine, set his mind to building up a liberation army and carries the magical ring of the unicorn with him, which allows him to free the minds of those corrupted by the antagonist, Galerius. My favorite thing about the writing was actually the English localization, which may sound weird to the few of you clued into this game as it was getting flack online for said localization. Having said that, I think people criticizing it really missed the mark because when taken in context of the game as a whole and in concert with the phenomenal voice acting, it 100% works. The characters are written with a theatrical and eloquent manner of speaking that fits the high fantasy setting and theater-like framing of cutscenes perfectly. This is so prevalent throughout that it was clearly a conscious choice likely made based on input from the original Japanese writers, and I personally believe it elevates the whole experience. If you're a fan of the genre, thought-provoking tactics gameplay, or are at all interested in what I've described thus far, then I can comfortably recommend you give Unicorn Overlord a try. Which is especially easy to do given there's a demo available which covers the first major area of the game and progress made in that demo carries over to the full game should you choose to buy it. Now there's obviously still a lot more video left to go through, so with that out of the way, let's get to what I really want to talk about, and what makes Unicorn Overlord a revolutionary take on strategy RPGs: the scale and depth. The scale of Unicorn Overlord is truly impressive, and I don't just mean in terms of the size of the overworld or the amount of content. For starters, the size of the cast and narrative is staggeringly large, and most of the characters contribute to the story throughout the game. While early on it may seem the story focuses on the player character and protagonist Prince Elaine, throughout the game, different and often unexpected members of the cast end up having their own significant plot moments and developments. Like early on, I fought and recruited a somewhat forgettable mercenary who ended up having important personal connections in the second major region I chose to tackle. There's also an absolute ton of dialogue and story scenes which are all incredibly well executed. Everyone, from the main cast to even forgettable bandit leaders and the like, are impeccably well voiced. On top of all that, the narrative unfolds across an expansive continent split into 5 major nations, each with their own unique characters, conflicts, and plot revelations. And speaking of the world, that's yet another great example of this game's incredible scale. The entire continent is represented in a massive and beautifully crafted semi-open overworld that the player explores in the form of a sprite. It may seem strange at first to adapt the open world in the form of an old-school overworld, but the benefit of this is that every single quest and battle, barring only a handful of examples, takes place on the same map you're exploring. This only adds to making the world feel huge, as you have an extensive number of battles, resources, and towns across the map to interact with. To illustrate this point further, I'll say there's also just a ton of content on offer here. At the time of writing, I'm over 35 hours into Unicorn Overlord and have only been to 3 of the 5 major regions in the game and have fought through dozens of battles. Building on that, I really appreciate that there's a ton of optional fights, some of which even add to the narrative and character development, or just otherwise offer the chance to experiment with your units. Which brings me to the final example of Unicorn Overlord's remarkable scale I want to talk about, and that's the unapologetic horde of different units, classes, equipment, and skills to play and experiment with. As mentioned earlier, your units represent a ridiculously large cast of characters, as well as any number of custom units the player can build from various templates and recruit. You have everything from soldiers, armored infantry, and archers to genre staples like various cavalry units, magic users, and griffin riders, as well as some unique options like those found amongst the elves and other non-humans. And the last way in which the units embody this sense of scale is in how a unit is actually a squad made up of multiple characters. Anywhere between 1 and 5 characters can be in the squad that makes up a unit. So with 10 units on the battlefield, the player can be fielding as many as 50 characters from their roster in a single encounter as they reach the second half of the game. Now that I've hopefully made clear how successful this game is in realizing an incredible sense of scale, I'd like to go through how the same core parts of the game I just covered demonstrate an equally impressive sense of depth that helps tie this wonderful game together. Returning to the expansive cast and story, let's get to what I believe best highlights the depth present here, and that's the writing. The almost Shakespearean dialogue really made interactions between characters a joy to watch, and I was consistently surprised by just how well performed and characterized they all were. Adding to this characterization is what I alluded to earlier and how so much of the cast is deeply woven into the narrative. There is hardly a named character that doesn't get their own plot-relevant moment to shine, or an interesting side story at the very least. Further contributing to the overall sense of character depth is the wide range of interactions that can play out as characters build relationships with one another. I've hardly engaged with this system myself, as there's already a great deal of time spent engaging with characters just in the main plot, even before investing in their relationships any further. I also really appreciate how the characters from different regions had distinct differences in the relationship to and motivations within the narrative. Nearly everyone has been wronged in some way or another by the antagonist Galerius, but many have to be shown that their woes are connected to him after first being introduced to us as antagonists themselves. While there's certainly a recognizable amount of classic good versus evil storytelling in Unicorn Overlord, there's also a surprising number of characters and situations that are compelling in their moral ambiguity. Especially in the instances where the player gets final say on whether or not certain characters live or are recruited into the liberation. Moving on to how I believe Unicorn Overlord further demonstrates its depth through the design of its world, and specifically the overworld. As I mentioned earlier, the overworld is not only a space to explore and travel across, but also serves as the stage for every battle you encounter. This really goes to show just how much thought and consideration went into the layout of this map and the various encounters and points of interest spread throughout it. Now on its own, I think this makes the world a brilliantly designed space and adds a lot of the depth I'm trying to put on display, but I do have more to talk about. The other way depth is added can be found in the various towns and settlements. Upon first discovering most towns or freeing them from enemy control, they'll be run down and in need of repair. The player contributes to this effort by delivering different resources found throughout the world, and upon making the necessary delivers, the town will be repaired and leveled up. Most towns only require a handful of deliveries to level up, but there are larger towns like those which can support a port or tavern which may require more deliveries before being able to access those features. The final layer of this is the ability to station any character as a guard at any repaired town. This will have them passively gather any nearby resource nodes for you while you're away, as well as allow you to give them gifts for building up their relationship with the protagonist, Prince Elaine. And finally, to cap things off both in regards to the depth and the wider point I'm trying to make, I'd like to once again talk about the way units work. I've already gone over how units are made up of anywhere between 1 and 5 different characters, but now I want to demonstrate just how much this impacts the wider composition of your units. For starters, each unit has a leader, which will determine a number of factors such as their movement and leader ability. As an example, if you make a mounted knight the leader of a unit, then that unit will be represented by that matching sprite and travel across the battlefield on horseback. Likewise, Griffin and Drake riding characters allow for their unit to fly over traps and other obstacles when acting as a leader. Furthermore, leader abilities can also be things like ranged, magical, and healing assists from other units. As for the rest of a unit's composition beyond the leader, that really just comes down to the player's preference or knowledge of which units work well together and which don't that will develop over time. For example, the game indicates early on that you may naturally want a tanky or evasive characters at the front of a unit, whereas you'd want your casters or archers at the back. However, the positioning of units in unconventional ways can often make a big difference in how a fight plays out, so it's worth paying attention to as you get to grips with the game. Moving on to my last couple of examples of discussing the depth of units, the wide range of classes set themselves apart in both major and minor ways through things such as their stats and scaling or what abilities they get access to. When combined with the ability to customize and hire specific classes of character around the world, you are never lacking for choices in terms of customization and variety of effective strategies. And what really makes these incredibly deep systems of unit customization so special is that if it all sounds like too much and you don't want to min-max an entire small army of characters, the game is more than willing to meet you halfway by automatically equipping the best gear available to the relevant character. Now I could go even further and talk about the order of abilities, initiative, and other combat mechanics, but the game tutorialized them very well and this video is already getting a bit bloated. So before wrapping up, I do want to touch on the art style and presentation really quick as they are simply incredible. Vanillaware once again delivers on the visuals with their unique and beautiful signature art style. And as usual, it's undeniably some of the best 2D art you can find in games, regardless of whether or not you vibe with the anime/manga aesthetic for characters. The music was likewise an impressive highlight, and I found pretty much all of it to be remarkably fitting for the game and its setting. And with that last bit taken care of, I think it's about time to bring this video back around to a conclusion. I have had nothing short of an amazing experience in my over 35 hours with Unicorn Overlord thus far and look forward to playing more of it and finishing it soon. In my not so humble opinion, Unicorn Overlord is a truly revolutionary take on the genre that I suspect will age quite well, and I have little doubt it will be remembered as an inspired and innovative strategy RPG for many years to come. Seeing the tactics genre take these meaningful steps forward has been an excellent experience that delivered on everything I could have asked for from Unicorn Overlord. And though I suspect Vanillaware will once again try their hand at something new, I would love to see it get a sequel someday. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ding the little bell if you want to be notified of my next video. I also do variety game streaming 5 days a week starting at 12 PM Pacific Standard Time, which is where I capture my gameplay footage used in these videos and play through the games covered on this channel. Link to my Twitch channel, Discord, and more in the description. Thanks again, and see you next time.